I'm Chris Terranova, and this is the Generational Exchange. 4 generations, one conversation. The business world is a tapestry woven from different threads. The experience of seasoned veterans, the tech-savvy energy of the younger generation, and everything in between. In this podcast, we'll unravel those threads, exploring the unique perspectives from panelists in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s on today's business challenges. By bringing together these unique voices, we hope to spark new ideas, bridge the generation gap, and equip listeners with a well-rounded approach to navigating the ever-evolving business landscape. All right, welcome to the podcast. Once again, we have our dynamic panel together representing all of those different ages, starting with the lovely and talented Rhett Suchu representing the 30s.
Hello.
Good evening, good afternoon, Rhett.
Good evening, sir.
And representing the 40s, as always, we have Jeremy Davidson, aka the Goat Wrangler. How are you, sir?
Well, I was delivering goats at 5 a.m. this morning, so you have to forgive the hat.
You look lovely and well rested, so that's important. How many goats did you end up helping birth there this week?
Well, we introduced ourselves to Meatball last week, right? And now
right.
Meatball has three lovely female cousins. So
very nice. Do they have names yet, or are those TBD?
They're being decided on by the Three Musketeers, so they're going to be named after Paw Patrol or maybe the Minions. So that'd be good, right?
Excellent. That's awesome. Well, congratulations. Can't wait to see the pictures. And representing the 60s is our good friend Mark Russell. Good evening, Mark.
Hello, everyone. And I feel like a slacker because we were only doing a significant alumni fundraiser today for the University of Dayton, and I started at 7 a.m. So I was an hour and a half, 2 hours behind Jeremy.
Very nice. And if you're watching the video, there's a little plug for the fundraiser. So if you're interested, go to our YouTube channel and you can see more about that. All right. So today's topic is going to be something that I think resonates with all of us. We're going to be talking about looking at our past, exploring some of those moments, revisiting them. We're going to start with 10 years ago, just so we had a point in time. But we want to look back, not with regret, but more with a lens of growth and appreciation. And along the way, you're going to get 5 powerful ways to transform your past experiences into kind of a springboard into the future where you can take those things and learn and grow from them. So let's start the exchange. All right, so let's talk about what was happening 10 years ago. Millions of people, including celebrities like Justin Bieber, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, they were all participating in a little thing called the Ice Bucket Challenge, which raised millions of dollars for charity, and it was associated with ALS. I did not know that, so thank you for that little tidbit. It was also the year that the Guardians of the Galaxy premiered, and the last movie was awesome if you haven't seen it. And it introduced us to Groot, right, which is an amazing character. What's that?
I am Groot.
There you go. Mark's one and only imitation.
Did you know that was Vin Diesel? He was the voice for Groot.
Yeah, right. Crazy. Kim Kardashian and Kanye got married in Italy and spent $12 million on that special day. And I think, what were they married like 6 years? So I think they got like $2 million a year out of that. So keep that in mind when you're putting your wedding together. The oldest place on Earth was found at a sheep ranch in Western Australia. The fragment is an ancient crystal, and scientists date it back to around 4.4 billion years ago. At the video for Gangnam Style by Psy reached 2 billion views on YouTube. Still a great song. A data breach at JP Morgan Chase and 6 other institutions caused 83 million accounts to be compromised. Not where you want your compromise to occur is at your bank. And if you're a Swiftie, you know this already. Taylor Swift's 5th studio album, 1989, came out in 2014. Some other things happened too in 2014. A lot of unfortunate things were happening all around the world. In Africa, the most widespread outbreak of the deadly Ebola virus in history happened. And in northern Iraq and eastern Syria, ISIS took over. While that was going on, somewhere over the South China Sea, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 disappeared with 239 people on board. Still haven't found that plane. And Maya Angelou and the late, great, beautiful Robin Williams passed away in 2014. So a lot happened in 2014. I'm going to ask you guys, what were you doing in 2014? Mark, I'm going to start with you.
Well, at that time, I still had 3 children, but most of them just had graduated from college. So that was a nice little financial bump. But I was leaving a very large education technology company after 9 years. And I went to an early stage company that was focused on adaptive learning. A bittersweet goodbye to many colleagues, such as yourself, Chris, and close allies mixed with the excitement of new adventures. And during that transition, I also moved from management into being an individual contributor. And I think, for me, the other transition was to make sure I was sensitive to not always telling the new company, well, this is how we used to do it. Because over time and having a few different roles, that does kind of wear old, but yet at the same time, they hired me for some of my experiences and they wanted me to help them grow from that organization. So, and if there were 3 simple takeaways I took from that transition, whatever I experienced was just unique to me. Always remain curious. And even if there were differences of approaches, try and figure out where that common ground was first, because then all of a sudden those gaps didn't seem as wide.
Right. Great. Rhett, how about you? I think you were starting 3rd grade. So
I was just getting out of diapers, sir. All right.
that's right. Well done. Very good.
proud
But you were
moment.
13.
At
So
13.
that was a problem.
Exactly.
Yes.
No, I was actually, this is crazy to think about. I was getting my undergraduate degree at the time. And at that point, I was very focused on actually getting a biology degree and was pre-med at the time. So business was not even in kind of my sights in the early parts of that. And then ended up starting a small convenience store in a little lake town. And that's what kind of turned me on to looking at starting a business or getting up some type of business degree, and went to my MBA, and that's where I met Jeremy, and the rest is kind of history from there. But yeah, I was still figuring out my journey about 10 years ago.
Wow. We're going to have to do a separate podcast about setting up a convenience store. That would be interesting.
It would, tell you what, it was fun. It was a good time.
Yeah, I bet. Jeremy, how about you?
Oh, I laughed out loud when I heard Rhett's response to that, because we were actually getting our undergrad at the same time. So I had about 12, 14 years worth of work experience under my belt. Had been traveling around the country, working with some of the country's largest school districts, and the small little startup that I had been with got acquired by this 25,000 employee international conglomerate, and their focus was always learning. And when I look back at 2014, that was the always learning year. I was wrapping up my undergraduate. I had gone back kind of late in life. We had a big push, so we did our PMPs that year, our CSM 1, 2, and 3 customer success manager certifications, ITIL, ITSM. I was kind of listing out what we did in 2014. My brain almost exploded. How in the world did we get that many that many learning opportunities into 1 year? But it was neat to look back on that, and wrapping up my undergrad degree, I guess my big dilemma at the time was, do I switch careers? I had gone back, Mark, I laughed earlier when you mentioned this. I didn't realize we both had the same undergrad degree in criminal justice. And
Oh, wow.
I remember thinking when I went back to school, I'd already been in business for 12, 13, 14 years, and I wanted it to be exciting. If I had to go sit my butt in the classroom 4 nights a week from 6 to 10 p.m., it ought to be cool. So I picked criminal justice. I got to ride around with cops and go to the prisons and write up reports from the courtroom, and it was a phenomenal experience. But wrapping that up, I kind of had a big decision to make. Do I stay with business? I loved it. Loved traveling around, working with the schools, or do I look at potentially moving into criminal justice because I love the program. I got my degree finally. So it was an interesting year for sure. How about you?
Yeah, you just reminded me about the CSM 123 and the ITIL. I forgot all about those. Yeah, that brought a small twitch to my eye. You and I were both working at the large ed tech company, right? That at the same time. At 10 years ago, I was a dad to two teenagers, right? So I had a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. Was traveling a lot, right? So it was a very busy time. And I think for me, during that time, there was a huge project that I was added to where we were doing a pilot of iPads in a huge school district, one of the largest school districts in the country. But the pilot was like 65,000 students and teachers. So it was huge. It was all over the county. And I just remember spending a lot of time traveling, being in that city. I had just finished my graduate degree. I was studying for the PMP. I don't know how I was doing that while I was working and traveling, right? And struggling to try to just manage everything at the same time. But it was a pivotal year. There was a lot going on, personally and in my career. So I kind of what you're saying resonates with me is like, how did we get all that done? How did we do all that at the same time? But that was one of those times where we just did, I guess, right?
We were younger.
Yeah, well, that too, right? But we weren't young. I mean, I was in my 40s 10 years ago, right? You were in your 30s. We weren't that young. So, we found a way to make it work.
Cool.
All right, so let's think about that time when we're looking back, kind of using the 10-year-ish mark, and we've already talked about, some things that we were working on. For each of you, and Rhett, maybe I'll start with you. What was something that stressed you out 10 years ago that maybe you don't feel is significant now?
Yeah, for me, ironically, when I was in college, I was trying to plan the next 10 to 15 years, right? Because I was not college definitely was about the experience, right? But I did not want to go and get a degree that I couldn't do something with, right? And so I was really stressed out about that and kind of planning out, okay, this will be job one, this will be job two, job three. Especially at the time, I was also struggling with the decision on whether or not I wanted to continue to pursue pre-med or try something else, right? So for me, it was a lot of stress around kind of planning and not necessarily like looking at the environment around me and what I was naturally gravitating towards or anything like that. And so that's been something that, I've worked on since then. And now I still plan things out, right? But it's more, maybe we look 5 years out types of things and don't make it too structured, right? Have an idea of where you want to be, where you want to go, but also have the flexibility and the presentness to identify the things that are happening around you and maybe what opportunities are there, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. Mark, how about you?
Well, I think, moving into that early stage company, there was always a lot of stress around obviously the revenue, either in new business development and or revenue retention, with the current customers and growing those. And part of that stress was really a combination of we have, 25, 30 people that are supporting, but yet there were only two of us, the CEO and myself, more or less, that, really focused on the revenue itself, the revenue growth. And we did a lot of, I'll say, over planning for what could go wrong. And I had to go back to, what one of my employees once told me is, don't worry about what hasn't happened yet. And even though, again, that organization didn't make it, it still made an impact. And, you look back now and say, well, gee, what we were doing 10, 12 years ago in that adaptive learning space has really flourished. So I think that's always, one of those elements that, looking back, could we have really convinced the investor community that it was going to take another 7 to 8 to 10 years to really mature? From that. So, but again, I think, to Red's point, sometimes 10-year planning, while that's a thing of the past, anything between 3 and 5 years now is referred to as long-term planning.
But do you feel like you've learned from that, like from that stressed you out now, kind of the unexpected isn't as stressful for you?
Correct. Yeah, that's really focused on, your adaptability and being able to make sure that there's a lot of, I'll say research to be done, not analysis paralysis, but make sure you have a lot of background information so you can present a much stronger, case.
Right.
Yeah. I would say for me, being transparent, I think when I was thinking about that time, my biggest fear maybe that was causing me stress was fear of failure and not being liked or not being seen as likable, I guess. I was so focused on trying to work hard and, get along, go along to get along, that, frankly, sometimes I did things that I didn't agree with. I a lot of times worked way harder than everybody else. And I missed out on, opportunities that I could have spent time with my family and friends. And when I look back at that, the things that were causing me to miss those opportunities, the things that were causing me to be stressed, those fears, they were really unfounded. And again, when we talk about generational, I was in my 40s. And I was, if you haven't listened yet, listen to the imposter syndrome episode. But I was dealing with that, and it was causing me a lot of stress. Now, 10 years later, I feel very much more comfortable. I'm a lot less worried about those things, right? So those things have changed for me. They're much less insignificant. Okay, another question for you guys. Did any of you take a risk 10 years ago that surprised you with a positive outcome, right? We're talking about some negative things or negative connotations or challenges. Was there something that you did as a risk 10 years ago that caused a positive outcome? Jeremy, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I think professionally, one of the risks right around that time was jumping into an MBA program.
Yeah.
The one of the stressors I guess I was kind of working through was, all right, how do I transition from an individual contributor into a more of a leadership role? Having made the decision to stay in ed tech, stay in business, versus making that career change to criminal justice, just couldn't afford it. Love the criminal justice people out there. But okay, if we're going to stay in business, then what's the next step? So decided to get involved in an MBA program, went to Boise State. It was a phenomenal program, big focus around entrepreneurship. I absolutely loved it. And was able to, I think, almost on a daily basis, take stuff that I was getting in class at night. And Chris was my boss at the time. Bring it back to Chris. And say, hey, guess what I learned? We were doing supply chain management last night, and I figured out how to take the seasonally adjusted regression model and apply it to our support team. And for me, that was kind of an aha moment, right? All of a sudden, what I was learning in real time was applicable back into the work environment. And anybody that's doing any kind of ongoing professional development, whether it's college, whether it's certification programs, take that and apply it. Figure out a way to apply it to your professional life and get some visibility around it. Like, I was fortunate; I had a manager I could go to and say, be super excited and be like, "Hey, look what I came up with!" Right? And he took it and he showed it to other people, and that. I understand that was a luxury that not everybody has. I feel extremely fortunate for that. Personally, I guess our big risk about that time frame was, we packed everybody up, sold the house, bought an RV, and moved into the middle of nowhere and started building a house. We bought a hammer and bought a nails, and I still remember the day we got up and running. We had water, and we had solar power, and a place to live in. And I called Chris up and said, "Hey, great news! I don't need to work anymore. I want to work, but I don't have any bills anymore." And for me, that took a lot of risk out of what I do professionally, right? Because then all of a sudden it wasn't about, oh my gosh, I've got to pay the mortgage. I've got to be able to take care of the family in the house. I had a younger family than you did at the time, but still a major stressor is what happens if. And for me, taking that out of the equation where it wasn't a have to, you don't have to get up and go every morning. You don't have to do this to be able to support your family and your loved ones. It made a difference for me professionally, because then I was looking at things that I wanted to do. Um,
Right.
I like working with startups, that ever changing, ever evolving, but there's some risk there, right? I mean, we found that out, right? I'm actively searching for career opportunities right now because there was some risk with the startup, but
Right.
Right.
uh, making some of those decisions, 10 years ago, that impacted our ability to take some risks and not be in in the boiling pot, so to speak, now, 10 years later when some of that risk comes through. So you live and you learn and you make decisions, and some work out, some don't, but that was a phenomenal one for us.
Yeah, but what a transformation, right? Both for your career, because you did get your master's degree, right? And you were working and building a house and everything at the same time, right? And I remember those days. Jeremy and I think for a decade, we talked almost every day for like an hour after work, and it would kind of blend together between personal and business and school and everything else. And I remember, just the way you described it, you had that enthusiasm and it made me excited, right? And I wanted to take what you were learning and reapply to what we were doing. So it was kind of a full circle moment. And I remember when you sold your house, you had shown me your house, and then you were like, I'm going to move out into the middle of nowhere. And I'm thinking, this is not going to last. And here you are 10 years later, birthing goats and, raising chickens. And I think it's awesome because you did something that you were really passionate about, right? But you had to take that risk. You had to step off the cliff and do it. And you've learned a great deal and stumbled along the way, but you've learned, how to be a real true homesteader. It's amazing. By the way, if you're interested in that, I keep telling Jeremy he's got to start his own like YouTube channel or something with him birthing goats and all that stuff. I think it would be an amazing watch, but put in your comments if you're interested there. Um, Red, I think you also kind of switched degree channels as well around the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I kind of narrowed it down to two major decisions that I made. One was I actually transferred 2 years into my undergrad to my second choice at the time. And so for me, at least, that was a huge risk because, I had already built up a base of colleagues and knew all the professors and kind of had my path drawn out right and all these things. And there was just something else that I wanted to do. And at the end of it all, I want to hopefully regret some of the mistakes I've made from trying to do something and failing than maybe being afraid to try it. So I went ahead and transferred and made that decision. And I mean, it worked out great. I have got a fantastic group of friends from there, still was able to get my degree. I'll talk about it later in here, but obviously built up a ton of confidence as far as, hey, I can totally uproot my life at the time, right? And go to a different place and be fine, still accomplish all my goals. So that was kind of part one, right? And then part two, and I want to echo Jeremy with big shout out to the Boise State MBA programs. They're amazing. So
Go Broncos.
go Broncos, baby. Football season's coming quick. I'm
Very
excited.
exciting.
So
Very exciting.
maybe talking about that. But the second choice there was right. Okay, well, you just got a science degree. What are you going to do? I think I'm going to go to business school. Great. All right. Cool. So then I had to make the kind of connection there and figure out, all right, well, Rhett, how are you going to use all this science knowledge and training and thought process, right, within the business world? How are you going to use it to connect to certain people still, maybe get more involved with tech businesses, medical businesses, things like that? How can you approach problems from a different angle for maybe people who have done an undergrad in business? How can you be an asset to that type of company? I had to kind of think through all those decisions as I was deciding to essentially not use my degree in the way that you're normally supposed to. I wasn't going to a lab. I'd caught a bug for trying business, and so or at least not going to a lab in the general way, using pipettes and everything. So those were the two big ones for me. And yeah, both of those risks turned out to be really good outcomes.
That's great. And, clearly you've done well in the business world, right? So there was no wrong path. It was
Right.
just different than you started with. But you had to, again, kind of that through line here is that you took a risk. You had to change gears, and that was scary, and you had to be brave, and you did it, right? So
Right.
wouldn't be having you on the podcast if you hadn't. So I'm glad you did.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Let's keep moving. Let's talk about a perceived failure from maybe 10 years ago or so that ultimately turned into a positive learning experience, right? Mark, maybe starting with you. Do you have a kind of something that might have at the time seemed like a failure, but ultimately, you got something positive out of?
Yes. So there was, I'll just say, a small falling out between a CEO and myself. And part of it is I believed in transparency and candor, with our clients, knowing what our limitations would be as an organization, either for investment, software development, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, I got caught in the crosshairs. However, I look back today and say that really those are two strong attributes of very strong leaders and organizations, that transparency and the candor, and the candor conversations internally. So I feel like I was able to somewhat live through. There's an old Gloria Gaynor song called "I Will Survive," which was mostly for women that were going through breakups. So I heard that once
No
or twice
judgment.
in our household with my sister. I knew something was bad when I heard that song going, or even quote the girls in the sorority would play it when one of them went through it. But then it was immediately going to the Elton John song, "I'm Still Standing." And that's how I look at the last 5 years is, through all those learnings, now what have I done to transform and really get into something that, I truly enjoy.
It's interesting too when you look back on it, right? Where you are is not where you expected. And again, to the earlier point that Rhett was making is you can plan out all you want, but sometimes things change and you have to pivot, right? And I think you've done that, incredibly successfully. Jeremy, how about you?
We're working with a mid-sized school district around the Dallas area at the time, and we were in the middle of piloting out brand new implementation process that we had come up with, essentially testing the idea of having customer success or implementation management kind of take over and transition from sales. It was an interesting concept back in the day. Salespeople used to do their own onboarding for customers, and we were trying to prove out that it wasn't scalable. Put together a whole new a whole new playbook, whole new process for what that looks like, and absolutely adored this customer down there, the school district that I was working with. Probably spent a combined total of somewhere around 3 months down there on site. Like, love the project manager, the project team. We go out to dinner every time we got down there, and the project as a whole, we came in, by the time we were up and running, we came in somewhere in the realm of like 28% under in terms of kind of time to implementation, right? We're extremely successful. We're under budget. And the company at the time came back and was raising rates, and the school district got really upset. Said, kind of felt blindsided. Said, "Okay, well, how are you guys doing this? We just got up and running," and they weren't having it. They said, "Fine, we'll do it, but we're not happy about it. We're going to scrap the entire project team that we've got." And I took it really personal. I had good relationships with everybody. Again, the really successful implementation. And I remember thinking at the time, well, shit, they just asked my boss and my boss's boss to have the project team that I was heading up removed. And it was a knee-jerk reaction from the district to kind of hopefully get what they wanted. But for me, I took it really hard. I still remember I walked out the door. Chris was down there, and I was drafting my resignation letter in my head. Forget this, right? Like, this is absolutely ridiculous. We could have a big success, and Chris, God love him, walked me off the ledge. Hey, company doesn't think you did anything wrong. We came in under budget. We came in under time. They loved you up until 10 minutes ago when they wanted something from us. And moved me over to work on some of the other largest accounts that we had. and it ended up being positive. But for me, I took that really personal. And if I didn't have a Chris or a leader that I could vent to and talk to and share some of that frustration with, that probably would have been it for me. Well, forget it. I'll go do something else, right? So I'll take that as a life lesson there, right? Where things that happen. I think Brett, you talked about this on the last podcast, the imposter syndrome. Things happen that are outside of your control. Uh, and they might feel personal as all get out. Layoffs is a great example of that, right? It feels really personal. But you learn from those things, you take them as opportunities, and there's bright spots on the horizon or a light at the end of the tunnel, however you want to look at that ahead. So
yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And that's it. Again, all of these points we talk about meld so well together, right? Because we constantly are finding ourselves referencing previous episodes. And so for me, Jeremy, when we're talking about kind of the negative to a positive, for me, it was the pivoting away from pre-med. Because for me, at least part of me was like, I'm giving up on a dream. A small part of me, admittedly, but I was like, hey, I'm giving up on something that I've wanted for 10 years or whatever, right? Since hitting high school. It's like, oh, you want to be a doctor. That's what you want to be. That's what you want to be. And all of a sudden it's, do I? Am I 100% sure that I want to spend the next 12 years in school to be a doctor? Because if I'm not, I should probably change now. And so for me, a part of that did, in the beginning feel like a failure because, you're all of a sudden you're on a new campus and you're like, what in the world am I doing? Like, what did I just do? I had this all set up. If I just would have stayed on that road, I would have been fine. But like we're seeing here, you can be on that road and then all of a sudden a trench can be drawn out in front of you, right? Now the road's not clear anymore. So best laid plans. But for me, it turned into a really big success in all the things I've been able to do and accomplish. I was able to go and work in Taiwan and working internationally. I probably never would have done unless I, did a Doctors Without Borders or something like that. So, I mean, it's opened so many incredible doors to essentially, fail at something in my mind, at least to a degree, to be able to succeed at something else.
It is interesting how it all ties together though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Quickly for me, if I go back again to that program that I was working on with the iPads, ultimately it was canceled. It was not seen as successful in the district's eyes. And being a part of that initially, I felt like I had failed as well. But when I look back on that time now, I learned so much through that process, through those challenges, how to deal with difficult personalities. And there were a ton of difficult personalities at the district, within the company. It was a lot, people in the classrooms. But I learned how to navigate that, how to balance, right? I had to learn about technology. I used to call myself the accidental technologist because I had to learn how iPad software works and all of these things that I didn't know anything about, but I had to learn. I still now kind of am like a tech nerd. I still love having all the toys and unpacking them and figuring it out and how they work. I learned that through that process. And then, the last thing I would say is that I think I found a strength that I didn't know I had. There was some really challenging moments where you weren't sure you could get through it, but you did, right? And as I look back on that time, even, past that, I built a strength that I still lean on today, through something that initially did not seem like it was successful, but I gleaned a lot of information and learned a lot of strength through that process. So I think, again, when we talk about through lines, I think we all learned something and turned it into something else. All right.
One of my favorite
Go
interview
ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
questions. One of my favorite interview questions I ask is, share with me a successful failure that comes from a movie back in the probably early to mid 90s called Apollo 13. And at the end of that mission, because they never made it to the moon, but they successfully got back to Earth, that is what that mission was known. So I love getting insights from people about a successful failure.
That's great. Well, even taking from, our time in the classrooms, and again, as silly as it sounds, it still resonates. Is, you know, instead of wins and failures, it was glows and grows, right? So things were more well-rounded, and I really like the way that sounds. So I think it's in the similar vein. Okay, we've kind of aired out our past a little bit, and thank you guys for being transparent. Let's talk about what to do with it next, right? I think the first thing that I think we've already all talked about was you've got to stop dwelling on the past with regret, right? Today, I'd like us to celebrate growth and appreciate those experiences that shaped us. You know, along those lines, we're going to go through this relatively quickly. We've got 5 takeaways to help you kind of look at your past and transform some of that, you know, what you might be looking at as regret or a failure, and use that to kind of springboard into a more fulfilling present and future. So along those lines, the first one is learning is a lifelong journey. We've talked about this in the past, right? We've talked about this on previous episodes. You should always be learning, whether it's your mentor, you as a mentor, whatever, you should always be learning. But it isn't a win or lose type of thing, right? It is a win or learn. It is a glow and grow. Along those lines, Jeremy, maybe I could point to you. Give me an example maybe of how you've learned from your past and used it to improve today, or any tips or tricks that you might have. I know we've talked about some of that stuff already.
I'll try to answer this one without giving you too big of a head, but I've had the opportunity over the last 20 some odd years to work with an awful lot of bosses, right? And I've had some phenomenal leadership, and I've had some real challenges over time. And I think I mentioned earlier one of my goals 10 years ago with the continuing education and some of the certifications was, how do I get into a manager position? And far and away the highlight of my career to date has been being able to have done that, right? To move into a leadership role, to have a team, to grow a team. We grew a phenomenal team, right? 11 to 500 and some odd folks over 4 years.
Almost 600 people. Yeah, it was a lot.
Um, and that was a once in a lifetime experience that I get to be a part of that kind of growth, right? A company that's 10xing over 4 years. But the highlight of my career, I love working with the schools and being an individual contributor, but being able to work with your team and grow your team and watch your team grow, right? To have those successes and those wins, and frankly, even the failures and the challenges. We could probably write a book on some of the goofiness that came up over that same time period. But all of those, what I would consider poor leadership experiences that I had over time, coupled with the good ones, kind of feed into how, what my leadership style is today, right? Because I want to emulate and provide that manager experience to somebody that's newer in their career, earlier in their career, that I wish I had, or that I actually did get, through some of my leaders, over time. And so that's kind of how I channel that. Like I absolutely love that role and that responsibility of being over a team and kind of guiding that direction and that career growth and career trajectory for some folks. And I want to be that manager, that leader that I always wanted, and in some cases got in my life. So I see all the pinging going on here.
We're just checking on my microphone. Keep going.
Oh, I got you. So I know that's a major takeaway for me, right? Over the course of a career, right? What were the things that resonated with me? What were the things that really put me off, and maybe second guess? Do I want to be in a leadership role? And kind of coupling those together in terms of what kind of leadership style do I want to have? What kind of impact do I want to have on those people? And it's honestly, it's been the highlight of my professional career, getting to be in that type of a role. So we'll give all the credit to the phenomenal managers that I had in the past, Chris and Mark and we called Jacob out on the last one. I don't want to call him out again, but
Right.
and the bad ones, because they taught me what not to do, and are still teaching me what not to do.
Yeah, 100%. But that's part of that lifelong journey, right? That's how you keep growing and you keep learning. You didn't stop at some point and say, I'm here, I'm done, right? I don't need to learn anything else. You take in all those things from other people.
Yeah. Jeremy, it's funny when you mention that, not to tailspin us too much, right? But that decision to become a people manager rather than an individual contributor, it is a very well, gosh, we should probably have that be one of our topics for later, gents,
No
actually,
kidding.
because it's a big switch to the mindset and the protecting people in your team, and it's a whole different beast. But if you love it, it can bring you a ton of joy. But anyways, not to not to tail us too much there. For me, the examples that I learned from are some of the ones that I've already mentioned previously, but uh, this is kind of within that 10-year span, right? But transferring universities, for me, that proved that I could handle major change and keep moving forward and still accomplish the goals, so be able to take those risks and those big steps and be just fine. Um, opening and running a convenience store to allow me to kind of pivot from my previous path, right? So for me, that was be ready to pivot and
Yeah.
pursue the best option that you currently have, right? Kind of echoing back to that, don't necessarily try to plan out 10 years and miss the door that's open right in front of you. And then, the MBA, allowed me to combine kind of my science undergrad with business practices and tools that allowed me to tackle all these problems from different angles and with different strategies, which for me, taught me, hey, you have the skills that you need. Now you just have to figure out how to apply and use them.
Right.
So for me, that's kind of what I took from those experiences.
Oh, that's great. I think, like I said, I think it is interesting that we all kind of have similar through lines. All right. So the first one was, lifelong learning. Second one is reframing the past, moving from regret to appreciation, right? As we've talked about on previous episodes, regret can be paralyzing. It keeps you stuck in the past, whereas appreciation allows you to see the past kind of as a way to grow, and you can use those lessons to become a better version of yourself. Difficult past experiences can make you stronger and more adaptable. Appreciation helps you acknowledge this resilience, and it builds confidence to face future challenges. So, Mark, I'm going to turn to you on this one. How do you do that? Do you have any examples or anything like that where you've kind of turned regret into appreciation, or maybe vice versa?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the author Daniel Pink, who's written quite a few books, including To Sell Is Human, he actually recently did a TED Talk and said that a certain level of regret does become a learning experience and or a motivator. Did I regret not asking, for that raise or for that new promotion? So it's interesting his little spin on it. But just today, I was speaking with a fellow colleague of ours, Chris, and we talked about the experiences of technical challenges and systems going down and distributed denials of service. And when you had to create those war rooms and how painful it was, especially for the technologists trying to figure out how to get us out of it. But yet at the same time, it built great team camaraderie, great respect for people and the roles that they were doing. So, if anything, it made us stronger and more prepared for the next challenges.
Right.
Now, certainly those challenges had something completely new thrown at you, but you could always rely back on those experiences to say, you know what, guys, may take a little bit. And, my role was to talk to our customers and say, even though, we're looking through 110 different things, wouldn't it be wonderful if we knew it was item number 83 that needed to be fixed? But unfortunately, sometimes you have to go in a linear fashion. And for the technologists, it taught them how to be thorough, how to make sure that they were dotting the I's, crossing the trees, or crossing the T's, getting all those things, or the trees. But, literally, that's where those learning experiences really gave you, those positive momentums moving forward versus oh shoot, someone missed this, and I'm gonna just hang it over my head for the next 6 months. So
Right. Jeremy or Red, I'll open it up to either one of you. Do you guys have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I can add. I think a lot of the feeling of regret comes from wishing you had done something differently, right? But the things that you did were with the best of your knowledge that you had at the time. And there are things right now that you're doing that in 10 years you're going to look back at and be like, I probably should have done that differently, right? Or you may do that. But I think the important thing to keep in mind, and that I try not to do, right, is not to look back and wish that I had done something differently, because I'm here because of the decisions I made. So I always try to focus on not looking back at what I could have done and more focusing on, okay, what are the decisions I want to make right now with the best knowledge that I have.
That's good. That's good. And I think that's a simple one too, right? You almost have to get yourself in that habit. All right, moving on to the third one, the value of mistakes. A lot of times we view mistakes as setbacks, but they can also be powerful opportunities for growth. If you analyze what went wrong without looking at it through a negative lens, you might find some valuable insights that can help you improve your skills, make better decisions, and avoid repeating the same errors in the future. Jeremy, what are some tools that you use maybe to kind of get the value out of the mistakes, that glow and grow type of thing, the live and learn, win or learn? How do you get something out of that?
Um, I think in current practice today, try to build teams with a culture of being accepting of mistakes. Right, we try to build teams with a mindset that, one, everybody's trying to tackle problems from the same good place. Right, it's either on behalf of the company or on behalf of the customer. It's coming from a good place. It may not have been the best decision, it may not have been the best choice, it may not have been the new process, maybe it didn't work out, but it was designed with the best intentions, right? And I think if you can cultivate a culture like that, you're able to have people on your team that are willing to take risks, that are willing to raise their hand and say, put me in to this new process that we're doing, even though I've never done it before, because I know, even if it doesn't work out with 100% success, it's going to be okay, right? You've got a certain comfort level, I think, within your team or your group, or, God forbid, you actually work for a company where that's a company-wide culture. Wouldn't that be phenomenal? But that's how innovation happens. That's how you get the next brilliant idea. And I know we've talked about it before, right? Like, me stepping into a team lead role or a director role, I should not be the smartest person in the room, right? Like, I've got phenomenal people that are working on my team, from my managers that work underneath me to their individual contributors that are seeing stuff in real time on a day-to-day basis. Bring that stuff up. And I think if you can cultivate an environment where it's okay to make a mistake, if it's coming from a good place, that's okay. That's what's going to give you your growth and your innovation and your blue ocean new idea on something that you can do for a team. So I don't know. It's kind of my knee-jerk reaction on how to incorporate that into your day-to-day work environment. Is hopefully you're in an environment where it's okay to make a mistake, because that's what's going to let you shine eventually.
Yeah, I think if you're not, then you should take a look at that culture, right? I mean, we've all worked in cultures that mistakes were not always fostered or used as an opportunity to grow. Now, you can't just keep failing at your job, but there's a difference between having an occasional mistake and not doing your job, right? So let's keep those separate. But I think that is part of looking at things as a culture too. It's a great point. All right, let's move on to the last one. The last one is continuous improvement. In this world that we live in, there is constant change. And continuous improvement can foster adaptability. You can learn to embrace new challenges, adjust to evolving situations, and readily adopt innovative approaches. And that's something I think, again, when we talk about through lines, we've talked about that through all this. We've all had to adapt. We've all had to learn. And I think as we've gotten older, right, and more mature in our careers, and it doesn't matter where we are, we've all learned to kind of roll with that. And I think that makes you a well-rounded employee, father, friend, everything, if you're adaptable. Mark, from that perspective, do you have any thoughts on continuous improvement?
Yes, I think, anytime you use and you want to set up goals, right, for those improvements, and it's kind of that continuous cycle. I try and always still use the SMART goals, right? It's the old acronym of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-based. I also try and leverage my internal board of directors as to here are some goals, and what I want to achieve in the next 6 months versus the next 2 years. From that perspective. So always trying to get that level of feedback as well.
That's a good one. Rhett, do you have anything on that one?
Yeah, I mean, mine is always try to set goals that are challenging and don't always feel comfortable, right? My kind of feeling that I'm looking for is sometimes that that feeling of, all right, I may be in deeper water than I thought. You don't want that feeling all the time, right? But you want to be setting challenging goals for you and your team that help you guys grow. So that's one of my key look fors.
No, I think that's great. Jeremy, any last word on that one?
Nah, if you're not growing, if you're not innovating, you're stagnant, right? You're behind already. There's always opportunities to improve processes, improve revenue, improve client outcomes, right? There's always areas for improvement. So, you know, I mentioned earlier, I really like that startup environment where things are always changing. It scared the heck out of me to step into a job where things were always the way they've always been done that way. But if you happen to be in a role like that, hopefully you're in a culture where you can take some risks, because even cultures like that, where this is the way it's always been done, it might just take one person raising their hand and say, what if we did X?
Right.
Um, I remember a Myers, it's like a Walmart in Michigan. One of the janitors raised their hand one day and said, "Hey, can we turn half the lights off at night? We might save some electricity." And he saved the company X number of $1 million a year with that raising his hand. And God love Meyer, they cut the poor man a check for a percentage of the money that he saved the company. Like that.
What? Wow.
That's cool, right?
I was
Wow.
just about to ask that, actually. That's incredible. Wow.
Sounds like a great
And,
place.
and one of the quick things that I learned from the three of you, being more on an operational side for the first time in my career, you sometimes do have to wait and see how things play out. What are those trends that you're now seeing? I think in a lot of cases, people will look at something, will implement something, and 2 months later, everyone wants to, the proverbial throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Oh,
Mhm.
this isn't working. Well, let's continue. Again, don't go too long, but give it enough time to see, okay, where is it working? Where isn't it working? Where can we make, some of those improvements, from that? And so I think that's the other thing is you just have to be open to those changes, but don't immediately have the knee-jerk reaction.
I think it's a great point. And it does say that there is opportunity to learn if you don't knee jerk, right? If you kind of take that in, and again, it goes back to environment, which we'll be talking about in future episodes. Is the culture that you work in allows you to grow a lot easier when there's room to do it, right? So great discussion on all those. Just a quick summary, right? As we've talked about today, all of us have a past. Some of it's great, some of it's not so much great, right? But we all have learned from those opportunities over the last decades for some of us, right? But real quick, to summarize our 5 tips: learning is a lifelong journey, number 1. Number 2, work on reframing the past from regret to appreciation. Number 3, understand the value of mistakes. Number 4, don't be afraid to embrace the unknown. And number 5, we should all always be striving for continuous improvement, right? So, any final words, gentlemen, before we wrap up the episode? Another great discussion as always.
Great
Um,
summary.
yeah, no, that was a great summary. I'd probably just say for those of you listening, if you feel like you're at a point in your life where maybe you think you didn't make the right decision or something like that, right? Try and do some analysis. Figure out if there's a door in front of you that you haven't tried opening yet. Pivoting isn't always as easy as it comes, but we have faith in you, and we're here to support you as well. So So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, but taking that risk pays off, right?
Yep.
All right.
You'll
ahead,
grow
Jeremy.
from it, and you'll grow from it, and as Chris said, you'll end up glowing. Right? Is that what it
Yeah,
was?
right. That's right. All right. Great discussion, guys. Always appreciate it. For everybody listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Generational Exchange. We hope the conversation between these generations sparked some new ideas and helped you see the business world from fresh perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more insightful discussions across the generations. And if you have a burning question or a topic you'd like us to discuss, leave us a comment or shoot us an email at cmsrconsulting@gmail.com. Until next week, from all of us here at the Generational Exchange, thanks for listening and happy learning.